What's the creepiest or most unexplainable thing you've ever seen that you haven't shared anywhere? Serious. When I was about 8 or so, my family went up to a campsite near a lake. We went with several other families and they brought their kids too. One thing me and this one kid would do is search the shallow areas for crawdads. As I was searching, I began to venture a ways out until the water was up to my waist. The water wasn't too clear, but it also wasn't muddy, and I could see the pale area of the shallows in the darker area where the water dropped off. But I didn't know that at the time. I ended up stepping into the darker, deeper water and began to fall in. Before I could, pale, slender arm grabbed my leg and pushed me back to the shallows. All I saw was the arm as it sunk back into the deeper water before I skittered back to the shore. I remember it as clear as day, but nothing has ever turned up from that lake. No bodies. No drownings. Nothing. My parents still think I made it up. I was in middle school and my sister was in high school and she was out with her friends. I went downstairs to get a snack and my parents were in the living room. I started crying and saying I was worried about my sister. She didn't have a cell phone yet, so there wasn't much we could do. Turned out she has been in an accident. She was fine, but it was scary. A few months later I was at school and I started crying. I called my mother and told her to call my grandmother. Grandmother didn't answer, so they called the neighbor. And the neighbor checked and she had fallen in the tub and broke her foot. She had been sitting there overnight. I've trusted my gut ever since. A long time ago in primary elementary school, me and my friend came to the school compound on a Sunday to explore. We came in the wee hours in the morning. And coupled that it was a Sunday, there was nobody in. We were walking along a corridor on the first floor. And suddenly we heard this thunderous noise above us. You know the sound where you drag a chair or a table across the floor? It was exactly that. But it sounded like there's multiple classrooms full of tables and chairs just moving around. It was loud. Very loud. And it was extremely sudden. There's no reason why anybody would be in school moving dozens of tables and chairs on their own on a Sunday 6 AM. We stood rooted, stared at each other for a second, and bolted. After we got out of school, he asked me whether I heard a lady screaming in the corridor. I said no. He didn't hear the dragging sounds either. Two people hearing two separate things. That's more terrifying than if you both heard the same sound. My ex-wife worked in NIC, but we lived in CT, so she would commute in. She started having constant nightmares and terrors and would wake up sweating and literally screaming. The nightmare? A plane would run into the World Trade Center and a lot of people would die. These started about 3 months before 9/11. We have never talked about it. My brother committed suicide in 2010. He was airlifted 100 miles from his house to the town by us because it's a large town with great hospitals. His wife, the only person that lived with him, of course, drive her car to the hospital, leaving their house completely closed up and locked. His cell phone was left in his home office by his wife. The next morning I got a call from his cell phone. I answered, but nobody was on the other end. I said hi a couple times with no response. I finally said everything is okay and the line immediately disconnected. Never got a call from that number again. I was in bed at night, woken up by the sound of steps on my roof tiling. I think I was about 13 at the time. I see a shadow walk past my skylight, unsure of what it was. I look outside my side window and see a man dressed in all black looking out from the construction scaffolding. After a while he looks into my window and I try to hide. My brother also saw him. We never found out what happened to him, but the police were informed. When my daughter was very young, 3-4, we were on a family vacation in a state park lodge. Our room had exposed wood ceiling beams to match the decor. Important later. It was supposed to be nap time for my daughter, but she was quietly playing by herself and just chatting away, and the wife and I were reading on the other bed. Out of the blue my daughter turns to me and asks for a piece of rope. I asked why she needed the rope and she nonchalantly replies, "It is for my friend, the purple girl on the ceiling." My wife asks what friend? And my daughter responds, I've been talking with the little purple girl hanging from that wood up there, points to the ceiling beam. She asked me for another piece of rope. Needless to say that nap time was over and we quickly exited the room. I was 10 riding my bicycle at dusk along the road I lived on, which was parallel to a set of railroad tracks. I moved off the road as a car sped by and a beer bottle came sailing at me from the front passenger seat. I could see 2 young women turned around laughing at me through the back window. I flipped them off and kept riding. About 30 seconds later, I heard the train slam into them. Several years ago my friends and I were road tripping cross country, and we stopped at a campsite in southern Oregon. Something about this unassuming place made us all uneasy. It felt like everyone was staring at us as we drove in and set up our tents. We'd gotten that treatment in places where we'd stuck out, but here it seemed less like gawking and more like suspicion? Malice? The sun set. Our gear was set up, and we got in the car to smoke some legal weed before bed. We were talking and passing a pipe around, and my friend in the backseat had the door cracked with his knee against it. With no warning, something slammed into the car hard enough that backseat friend was pushed away from the door and the whole car rocked on its suspension. We immediately started the engine, turned on the brights and drove around our area looking. Nothing. We fell asleep in the car arguing over if anyone was willing to get our gear before we went to a motel. When I was a kid I was playing in our kitchen when I saw a huge dark figure walk past the kitchen and down the hallway leading to the bedrooms. I walked to our back patio and saw the rest of my family watching TV. The patio is on the opposite side of the house from the hallway. I walked to the hallway and started looking for who it could been but never found anyone. Still have no idea who or what it could been, but it's always creeped me out thinking about it. This happened to me too, but it was my 6'7" uncle looking for beer in the garage past our bedrooms. Not technically seen, but heard. When I was about 15 I willingly stayed home alone to look after my pets while my family went on a cruise. One night I heard the distinct sound of the old kitchen window open. Freaked out and hid in the cupboard. Was so afraid that I called the police. They showed up soon after. One stayed with me and the other went around outside to check the window. Window was closed. No footprints. No marks on the window or anything. To this day I'm puzzled by this and am still confident that I really did hear that window open. I got recalled into work and was driving at about 3 AM. I was in a very rural area in western Washington. As I come around a curve I see a woman in a nightgown on the side of the road looking up at a steep embankment. Just standing there staring away from the road. There are no homes nearby. Not for miles. I call 911 and pull over about a minute up the road not knowing what to think. Deputy showed up, couldn't locate anyone and was as dumbfounded as I was. I was probably 18 years old and was driving at night to see a friend. This man kind of jumped in front of the car to make me stop. He honestly looked crazy. I slowed down the car to almost stop and he moved to talk to me, I think through the window. But I just drove off once he got out of the way. I was so creeped out. I never told anyone because I felt guilty that I didn't help him. Mine's pretty minor. I was awake one summer night with my window wide open to try to cool my room. And I heard this gigantic droning sound appear out of nowhere and remained for a few minutes. Sounded like it was coming from just outside my window above the road. It was one of the loudest sounds I've ever heard. Didn't sound like a helicopter. There wasn't that chop of blades in the air. And once it had stayed for a few minutes, it faded away. Like it was going up into the air. Never heard anything like it since. When I was a kid, 10-11 years old, I awoke in the middle of an autumn night and looked out my window. There, just 20-30 feet away from me, were 2 spherical balls of light dancing around each other. They seemed to float in midair. I assured myself I was awake. And I was. They bounced around for a while. Then disappeared slowly. Like a light dimming. It was effing weird. Edit. Remembered more. It was pitch black. I grew up in Norway. And in autumn it gets really dark. It was also raining. Or a light drizzle. I distinctly remember the drops of water on the window creating a trippy visual interacting with the spheres. I must have been watching a good few minutes. And the spheres were moving really slowly past an outhouse in our garden. My memory of this is really not one of fear. But more of curiosity and fascination. I'm 100% sure I was awake. And that I really saw this. Running through a large field in the middle of a nice neighborhood on Halloween night. Got gas sprinting halfway and reached out to hold onto a tiny tree. Felt what I can only describe as claws like bugles on your fingertips wrap around my hand. Noped the FK out and ran back to my group of friends. There were no leaves because it was fall, so I still have no clue what it was. In my mother's house. The basement light would turn on while we were away. And even if it was turned off before we left, it was somehow back on when we got back. Once I went downstairs and was like, hey Mr. Ghostman, this is not good for the bills, could you PLS chill it with the lights? Yes, I know it's dark down here, okay thanks. Light stayed off. Edit. Holy Christ, more than 2 people upvoted me, what? Also. No, I have not seen Parasite. She lives in a small town home and the basement is small. Bare. And open. If someone could hide in there, I'd be extremely impressed given the complete lack of hiding spaces. When I get the chance, I'll give her a nightlight for Mr. Ghost when I see her. It's what he deserves. Also, if we did have a squatter, that person wouldn't be able to hid very long. My dog and 2 cats live there. All of which are very alert to strangers. Smell or looks. Especially the dog. My dorm hall had some weird shit happen. But one of the weirdest was that I went to the bathroom to wash my face and brush my teeth. The sink was right next to the entrance, and as I washed my face, I saw and heard the door open and noticed a figure move to the end of the stalls. I figured a girl had just come in to use the bathroom. I dry off my face and begin brushing my teeth, but realized I didn't hear anyone else. I checked each stall and no one was in there. I quickly grabbed my stuff and noped out. Well, I think I may have shared this once before. But I was driving with someone through a very odd, small town in Arizona. As soon as we entered the city limits, I felt this extreme heaviness. Very surreal. Dark. Almost like a shroud of evil. As soon as we exited the limits, we both, not having spoken in a few minutes, said, "Did you feel that?" We both did. It was really weird. About a month later, I was reading Time magazine, I think it was Time, and there was an article about that town and how it is so well known for cult-like polygamy and child marriage, etc. That explained a lot. Back in 2016, my mother was staying at my place because my father was in the hospital at the time and my apartment was right next to the hospital. One night I had this dream that the landline rings and my mother answers the phone and hears the news that my dad has passed away. She hangs up the phone and tells me that my uncle, a doctor at the hospital my father was in, just gave her the news of my father's passing. I wake up startled. I have a drink of water. And just as I start feeling relieved that this was all just a bad dream, the phone rings and my mom picks it up. I was just watching her from a distance, noticing the expression on her face, noticing the tears that started dripping down her cheek. And she hangs up the phone and tells me that my uncle just told her that my father has passed away. This is the only unexplained thing that ever happened to me, and this is the first time I share this with anybody. Edit. Thank you everyone, appreciate your kind words and condolences. My father died when I was 15. In my freshman year of college. Me and my roommate in the dorms were somewhat close. But really had only been known each other for a month when the creepy thing happened. I hadn't told her much about my childhood. But she knew that my father had passed. One day she woke me up and asked me, "Did your father used to call you, insert silly childhood nickname here?" I hadn't heard that name since I was 6 or 7. I definitely never told her that he used to call me that, as it was a repressed memory that I hadn't thought about in a long time. Anyway, as it turned out, She had a dream that my father had come to her and asked her to take care of me, calling me by this silly childhood nickname. It was always difficult for me that my father never saw me graduate high school or start college. But I guess he did. From wherever he is now. You know that black cloud that enters a room in The Grudge? I saw that for real one time. Following a person who entered the apartment I was in. I freaked out and almost started hyperventilating. But of course, I couldn't tell the people around me what I was seeing, as I knew no one else was seeing it. I just darted out of there and sat in the elevator for a while on my way out. Never had shared that before. My brother gave me 2 cats before leaving the house for 6 months. One of the cats could not adjust. She became sad and stopped eating. We tried everything with her, but she eventually passed. One night I woke up to the sound of a cat walking in the room and some meowing. But the other cat had been snuggled up with me. It was a pretty sweet moment, I think. Or maybe due to the stress of her passing I just dreamt it. I don't know, lol. I've had 3 miscarriages. I knew I was going to miscarry before it happened. Each time I saw my baby as a young kid waving at me like a goodbye. My third I lost in the bathroom the next day. With my daughter I knew it would be okay because I had no dream of her saying goodbye like my previous babies. Oh my word, this blew up. Thank you to all the kind comments and the awards. I really appreciated y'all. My father was my grandmother's favorite child out of 6. Partially because he was by far the youngest out of 10 children. She nicknamed him Little Mountain, as the last character in his Chinese name was Otilda, or Mountain. I remember going to her funeral when she passed, and we were burning paper money for her to use in the afterlife, a Taiwanese Chinese tradition. I vividly remember watching my dad picking up a scrap of half-burnt money and making a sort of strangled noise. It was burnt in such a way that it resembled the character Otilda, even down to the middle prong being longer than the other 2. I'm seriously not religious or superstitious, but that was probably the closest I ever got to believing in the supernatural, or at least ghosts. When I was about 9, in the 1970s, I was playing football in the street. A bus came along, so I jumped up on the pavement. As it passed I noticed my aunt and she smiled and waved to me. When the bus had gone I carried on playing. I went home several hours later to find my aunt had died the previous evening. Backstory. Me and this guy were kinda a thing and had gone to the beach alone. I got a parking ticket. Ticket was taken care of within that week. Fast forward 3-ish years. He unfortunately took his own life, and this was a couple days after the funeral. I'm sitting on my bed with my friend. She had just gotten a new bag a couple days prior to our friend committing suicide. My friend reaches into her bag and pulls out a parking ticket. It was my ticket from years before, when I went to the beach with him. Never had an explanation for it. Just knew it was him. When I was wee I went to my garage to get something and a mannequin just stood up like it was flat on the ground and sat up. Exactly a year after my closest friend killed herself I stumbled into her boyfriend on a bridge. At midnight. In a city of 12 million. It weirded me out like nothing else. He also seemed shaken. P.S. I sometimes have dreams that show me glimpses of random events I'll experience in the future. But only half of them come true. My theory is that they're all possible future realities, or that they are just some of the countless things that might happen to me. Hence why not every dream becomes a reality in the future. Why do I experience this? I have no f***ing clue. I sometimes have similar experiences. They come in flashes while I am awake. Very brief. Almost like a feeling. It's usually a few seconds before the event happens. It's always from my perspective, not an objective observation. It's always my immediate future. Sometimes as much as 10 seconds before it happens. Then it happens exactly as I saw felt. It hasn't happened in many years. Maybe 10 years. I'm in my mid-50s now. I sometimes wonder if age has something to do with not experiencing it anymore.